Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. This is Boris Zinghausen with you. Today is May 10th and we have a lot of very interesting news. In this episode, why didn't Kim Jong-un come to the parade for Putin and instead just sent him a wreath? But the most interesting things happened behind the scenes of this parade. Believe me, some moments will really surprise you. And also about the important visit of world leaders to Kyiv today. Russia is being prepared for a 30-day truce. And about the warning from the American embassy regarding massive shelling of Ukraine. And as well why the airspace over the Kapustin Yar testing range from which the Oreshnik is launched is being closed again. All this and more in today's episode. Believe me, it will be interesting, especially if this is your first time on this channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Let's get into it. So it turns out the most interesting things were happening behind the scenes of the parade. Many were puzzled. Where is Kim Jong-un? How could that be? After all, it was officially confirmed that North Korean troops are participating in the war. They even handed out awards, but their supreme commander-in-chief didn't show up. The most common explanation for why this didn't happen is that sending Kim Jong-un's armored train, which would take a couple of weeks to get to Moscow one way out on the North Star and another couple of weeks back, just for a 1-hour parade, is a very costly and exhausting endeavor. That's why Kim Jong-un decided not to go, but there's another version which I tend to believe more. But I'll get to that a bit later. So, while Kim Jong-un didn't go to see Putin, he did visit the Russian embassy in Pyongyang and sent a basket of flowers and congratulations on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the victory in World War II. Well, in general, look, traditionally, the Korean Central News Agency, now their congratulations always sound very grandiose. In general, it sounds as follows. The activities of the supreme leadership of the DPRK are a vivid demonstration of its strong will to actively contribute to the defense of the sovereignty and dignity of both countries, the well-being and happiness of their peoples, and peace and security in the region through the power of Korean-Russian friendship, which, in the new era, has turned into true comrades-in-arms relations, a strategic partnership for all time. Sometimes their wording is a bit awkward because the translator there is slacking off. But overall, I think you, like me, read this in the voice of a North Korean announcer, any one of the North Korean announcers. Just like that. And now, friends, the main thing. Honestly, when I saw this photo at the Russian embassy and that basket of flowers sent to Putin and the Russian people to mark the victory, at first I couldn't believe my eyes. Just take a look at this photo. The basket, as you can see, is placed right behind Kim Jong-un and looks exactly like a funeral wreath with a ribbon from friends, comrades, and so on. Honestly, this is just completely out of line. Sometimes I get the feeling that Kim Jong-un is just blatantly trolling Putin. Here he is. Now he's giving him some kind of funeral wreath. Earlier, when Putin visited him, as I showed in one of the episodes, he actually gave him a gravestone. Here's the photo. In Kim Jong-un's opinion, maybe it looks nice or something, but you can see everything on Putin's face. He got the message. A little portrait on black granite. There you go. First the wreath, then the gravestone before that. Is this some kind of build-your-own-grave kit for Putin, or what is it? So what's left? Just to give him a fence for the grave. But honestly, Kim Jong-un should feel a bit offended. His troops actually fought in this war. This has been officially confirmed. Some of them were taken prisoner, some were simply disposed of. And the biggest box at the parade was from the Chinese military. So Putin just shook hands with the North Korean generals. And that was it. The North Korean troops didn't even participate in the parade. But in his speech, in his opening remarks at the parade, Putin was practically fawning over China from every angle. We'll talk about that a bit later. There you have it. But as for his North Korean nuclear buddy, the little villain, he seemed to have completely forgotten about him. I think many people noticed that all the events at this parade looked as if Chief Xi Jinping had come to inspect his subordinate, Putin, who was bustling about, even acting as an entertainer himself at times. And everyone who was there understood this. You could see it clearly on the faces of the few dictators who showed up. You know what this reminded me of? I realized who Putin reminded me of. Whispering something in Xi Jinping's ear, explaining, this is here, that's over there. Do you know who he reminded me of? He reminded me of himself, Putin. In his early days during the Sobyanin era, that is, Putin carrying suitcases for Sobyanin and looking up to his master with reverence, hanging on his every word. And that recent video, which is actually old but only recently surfaced online, where Putin and Sobyanin are either celebrating Sobyanin's birthday in Finland or something like that. Anyway, some occasion like that. And in the video, Sobyanin is cutting something and Putin is there saying, oh, you're doing such a great job, joking around, hovering around him. Basically, that's exactly how Putin was at this parade around Xi Jinping. That's exactly the kind of Putin we saw. In fact, Molly's life cycle has come full circle. In other words, he's gone back to where he started, carrying suitcases for his boss. It's a disgusting sight. And what's more, Putin wasn't even trying to hide it. He seated all the less important guests in other stands while he himself sat and entertained with Xi Jinping. I also remember one odd veteran who started telling Xi Jinping something and Putin acted as a sort of interpreter. Basically, the veteran was about 70 years old and he was telling Xi Jinping something as well, also in a rather strange manner. A gymnastyorka, some kind of cap, it's not even clear what uniform he was wearing. But what could this veteran, who was about 70, maybe 75, possibly tell if he wasn't even born when that war ended? What could he possibly have to say? Under yesterday's video about that very same disgraceful parade, many people noted that, strangely, the number of veterans on the stands increases every year. That is, even though they should be at least 100 years old by now, at the very least. You know who else I remember? A small, chubby-cheeked kid in a pilot cap who was sitting 2 rows away from Putin, kept trying to get into the shot with Putin. I don't know who brought kids in pilot caps there, but this one was either laughing or yawning the whole time. In other words, he was openly showing his attitude toward what Putin was saying and doing. When I say that the entire elite of global repulsiveness gathered there at this Satan's ball, that's exactly how it is. And of course there were distinguished American guests as well. As for another American guest, I'll tell you who the first one was, in a moment. Another American guest was the director, Oliver Stone. He was sitting in the stands, attention, right next to President Putin's aides Nikolai Patrushev and Alexei Dyumin. Well, I think there's really nothing more to explain here. And somewhere nearby, the mayor of Moscow, Sobyanin, was also sitting. Truly, for some people, money really doesn't stink. A most disgusting, vile traitor, absolutely without principles. He got his talentless son a job at Russia Today, Oliver Stone, while he himself keeps making film after film about Putin. In other words, he's completely sold his soul to the devil. Although in this case, perhaps even mentioning the devil is somehow inappropriate because he's nothing compared to Putin. Maybe Oliver Stone should have a chat with Schroeder. He could tell him how things turn out, how a completely sold out reputation ends up playing cruel jokes on you later. Let me remind you, sanctions were even being considered against Schroeder, who sold out, for a cozy position at Gazprom and Rosneft. And some establishments, pubs, restaurants on his very own home turf won't even let him in the door, treating him as a traitor. And there's a sense that if he does show up there, he's really not going to enjoy his evening. All in all, Schroeder was forced to leave the boards of directors at Gazprom and Rosneft. What a pity. But as for Oliver Stone, all of that still lies ahead for him. Oblivion and the stigma of being a traitor. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And if you're already subscribed, make sure you've hit the notification bell. And as for another American guest, the rather ridiculous Steven Seagal, I won't even comment. He outdid everyone in his eagerness to squeeze Putin into that rubber trinket box of his, I mean, Steven Seagal even said, I'll go fight for Putin. Well, if I have to. No, but he didn't. He's in United Russia. He's involved everywhere. That's Steven Seagal. But unlike Oliver Stone, he only has one award. A film award, I mean, the Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Director. So in 1995, he decided he was also a director and shot an absolutely terrible, just utterly talentless film. And I know why Putin and Seagal hit it off, because they both love to tell the biggest whoppers and even make up their own stories. In fact, the media have noted that Steven Seagal invented many episodes of his life and also told a lot of questionable stories about his past. Oh, he really reminds me of someone. Well, for starters, he claimed that he trained under the founder of Aikido. However, that man died in 1969, and his most famous student said, I have no idea that Steven Seagal ever trained here. Nobody knows him here. But that's not all. You'll see what I mean in a moment. You know, every neighborhood had a kid like this. In addition, Steven Seagal, without any evidence, without proof, claimed that he trained with the CIA, took part in operations, even trained CIA agents, fought the Yakuza, and with the help of the Irish Mafia, is also a leading world expert on swords, speaks Japanese, Russian and Italian, has trained UFC fighters, and so on and so forth. Exactly, Yenka. Exactly. Yemimi Posh. Everyone had that one kid in their neighborhood who would claim he jumped out of a convertible at 300 kilometers an hour, or jumped off a building, I don't know, or that some guys from another neighborhood attacked him and he took down 15 of them with a spinning kick. Well, at least the ones who didn't manage to run away in time. There's also another Lukashenko. Remember Lukashenko, who claimed he drove a tractor at 300 kilometers an hour and said, I was driving a tractor at 300 at a speed of 300 kilometers per hour. I thought I was going to take off. An airplane, he says, takes off at that speed. So this is basically a gathering of elderly braggarts, all of them together in one place. All in all, there were a lot of oddities with this parade where Chinese, Laotian, Vietnamese and African soldiers marched. Let's start with the main oddity, the paradox of the parade. How is it that Nazis are celebrating Victory Day over Nazism? How did that even happen, right? How did it come to this? The grandfathers fought in the war, but it's the grandchildren who ended up shell-shocked? And so what were those Laotian and Vietnamese soldiers even doing there? Does anyone remember, I remember it straight from history, the first Laotian front, the second Vietnamese front. Well, in general, I think the announcer, the one who was commentating on the parade, really understood where all this is heading geopolitically, and he commented with a special kind of excitement when the Chinese soldiers marched by. Ceremonial units from China are marching solemnly across Red Square. Now I understand what this was all really about. In other words, at one of the next parades, on Red Square, only ceremonial units from China will be marching. She was just trying it on for size. What would it be like to review this parade on Red Square? And as for Putin's speech, of course, it's a masterpiece of historical manipulation and sycophancy. Forgive me, friends, but I won't show you his face. I care about the mental health of those who watch this channel. But here are two sentences that say a lot. This, let me remind you, is Putin's opening speech before the parade. The complete defeat of Nazi Germany, militarist Japan, and their satellites in various regions of the world was achieved through the joint efforts of the United Nations countries. That's everything, right? We highly value the contribution to our common struggle made by the soldiers of the Allied armies, members of the resistance, and the courageous people of China, by all those who fought for a peaceful future. So the soldiers of the Allied armies, they're somewhere out there. All of that is just somewhere over there. And the courageous people of China. Just imagine. Here I think the emphasis is even clearer. At this point, it's hard to even imagine who would be in charge of the parade. Let's leave this strange parade alone. Besides, what kind of parade is it really? What kind of concerts are you putting on there in Red Square? millions, let me remind you, millions died and were maimed. Like, it was only where in 1965 that they suddenly decided that May 9th is a holiday. A holiday. With tears in our eyes, concerts. Brezhnev revived it. Under Stalin, there were no parades at all. People mourned the millions who died and those who returned with terrible injuries. Later, these maimed and crippled people were sent off to Velam so they wouldn't be an eyesore. I think you know this story too. They didn't want the disabled to spoil the image of the cities. And then those who returned from the war were even sent to concentration camps. Apparently, they hadn't fought the right way or had been taken prisoner. I look at these drunken Russians shouting the word victory, and I just can't understand. Okay, sure, your grandfather fought and your great-grandfather too, but why are you putting a pilotka cap on your own head? Honor the veterans. Well, take a look at this photo. Do you know who this is? This is Ivan Lyson. In this photograph, Ivan Vasilievich is 97 years old, a veteran of the Second World War. He went to the front at 18 and in battle made it all the way to Germany. And in May of 22, after the full-scale invasion, when you, let me remind you, once again put on side caps and helmets for your parade in Russia to march in yet another procession, this is the kind of gratitude a real veteran received from you. As a result of a Russian shelling in the Kharkiv region, Ivan Lyson nearly died and lost the house that his father had built in their native village of Zolochiv. How do you honor your veterans over there, huh? He never recovered. I mean, just imagine. The man was almost 100 years old, and he couldn't recover from the stress because, well, you saw what those shells did to the house, to the car that was riddled with shrapnel next to the house. And a month later, he died of heart failure. The man lived to be 97. He survived the war. Who exactly are you honoring at those parades of yours? Take a good look, Russians, at this veteran and at what Putin has done to his life. But friends, we do have those who are giving the occupiers their due for the destroyed Ukrainian homes, the cities wiped off the face of the earth, the lives they have taken, our warriors who even now continue to hold back this horde that declared a ceasefire for a couple of days just so Putin wouldn't keel over somewhere out there on the square. Legion, an important fundraiser for the freedom of Russia, Legion, which is destroying our occupiers and carrying out crucial and successful operations behind enemy lines. This fundraiser is for the assault UAV units, for the reconnaissance UAV units, and for those who drop gifts on the heads of Russians. Some of the war criminals have already been sent to a concert. You know who I mean. Urat, the rest are just being eagerly awaited there. That's why this fundraiser is so important. Our warriors need this now, more than ever. So I ask you to support the fundraiser. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video and also in the comments. If you're not watching on my channel, here's a QR code. You can use it to go directly to the fundraising page for the Legion. There's also a PayPal link in the description of this video. If you want to help destroy this filth that has come to our land, please join in. A huge thank you to everyone, both from our warriors and from me personally, as always. And one more thing about the veterans whom Russians honor. On October 31st, 2021, a well-known Zaporizhia veteran of World War II, participant in the Battle of Stalingrad, Ivan Zaluzhny, passed away. He lived to be 104 years old, but he couldn't bear it. He was deeply affected by the death of his grandson, who died in the summer of 2014. He outlived his own grandson. His grandson defended Ukraine and died in 2014. That was his only grandson, and although the veteran lived to be 140, after his grandson's death, he became very, very ill. So, here's another story for you. During the shelling of Kharkiv on March 21st, 2022, former Nazi concentration camp prisoner Boris Romanchenko was killed. He survived 4 Nazi concentration camps. The Kharkiv resident was 96 years old when a Russian shell hit the house where he lived. These are the real veterans whom Putin is destroying. Those youthful-looking 70-year-olds who sat next to him in the stands have nothing to do with World War II. So every time I want to ask, what exactly are you planning to repeat all the time? You mean you can repeat the feats of the Wehrmacht? Aren't you already repeating them in Ukraine? Or maybe you want to follow the path of Boris Romanchenko and go through 4 Nazi concentration camps? And then they whine. We, Russians, are being forbidden to wave Russian flags on May 9th, to wear the St. George ribbon, to hold car rallies. Those crazed wolves, they weren't let into Europe. They're not allowed to drive around with those symbols on their cars. Why did you even combine the victory in World War II with your own shameful war that you call a special military operation? Are you completely out of your minds or what? And how did everyone suddenly become Russophobes? They forbid Russians from organizing car rallies across Europe on May 9th. But by the way, the Estonians are great. Today I came across a video. Traditionally, on both sides of the Narva River, on one side, Russians play their concerts, with songs and dances in their military caps. On the other side, Estonians stand in silence without any of those ridiculous, dances, because, let me repeat, millions died and were maimed. What? What are you dancing on bones or something? In general, this is an annual standoff on both sides of the Narva River. And you know what? What struck me? On one side, the Russians always set up a huge stage. They sing something like Mother Russia, Sarmatushki, Our Tattoos, and so on. And on the other side, the Estonians just stand there calmly, and there's a banner on the wall that says, Putin is a war criminal. They stand there in silence. And on the banner, there's red paint like this, symbolizing blood. They stand there in silence. And this really infuriates the Russians on the other side. They start shouting even louder so that the hawthorn-berry echo spreads across the whole area. But it doesn't work. They're really annoyed by the calm Estonians. With the Putin is a war criminal banner. And I want to send a big hello to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Poland, everyone who borders Russia and helps Ukraine, and to all the countries that support Ukraine. And by the way, I'm proud that I also have roots in Estonia. Well, the Kremlin published a photo there. I don't know if they did it on purpose, but they made all the visiting. Dictators look a bit ridiculous, In the photo, Lukashenko is kind of glancing sideways toward the podium where the master sits and the master's master sits. Next to Lukashenko, Pashinyan was there in a cap, probably, thinking we wouldn't recognize him. No, we recognized him. We did. I think it was a huge mistake for Nikol Pashinyan to attend this strange event. And now, let's talk about how the 1.5-meter tall conqueror wants peace. The US Embassy in Kyiv has reported receiving information about a possible large-scale air attack that could happen in the near future. They published the warning on their diplomatic mission's website. And, as always, the embassy recommends that US citizens be prepared to take shelter immediately if an air raid siren is announced. This has happened before, more than once. So what new did they actually say? That you need to take shelter if there's an air raid alert? Well, people in Ukraine have understood this for a long time. So, as I see it, they probably think that Putin, after stockpiling missiles following his satanic gathering, will start shelling Ukraine again. But there's a sense that, well, maybe he won't. Why is that now? We'll get to that in a moment. Some people, by the way, are also adding here that the airspace over the Kapustin Yar testing range will be closed on May 12th and 13th. Let me remind you, the Kapustin Yar testing range is the place from which, theoretically, that very Oreshnik missile could be launched, the only one of its kind that was previously fired at Dnipro without a warhead. So, basically, People are combining these two pieces of news into one and saying that Putin might launch an Oreshnik missile, so be ready to take cover. I'm just begging you. In Russia, they've really mastered the art of reviving things that have long been dead or never existed in the first place. Putin, Oreshnik, what else is there? The Russian auto industry. All of that has been dead for a very, very long time. They can't even manage to bury Lenin. To this day, a country of paradoxes. They build churches, have fully integrated the church into the state and turned it into a tool to justify war. The chief priest, that FSB agent, Patriarch Kirill, even signs letters saying, have more children. More. Putin needs more cannon fodder. Hurry up and give birth. Or I'll send you a letter. So they just, Lenin. How does all of this even fit together? Their main military church is khaki-colored. Then they have Patriarch Kirill, and Lenin, an unrested corpse, lies in the middle of red square. And what's more, this unrested corpse once demanded that priests be shot as counter-revolutionaries. How does this whole mess coexist in their heads? Although, I think you know perfectly well how, but today is an important visit, a very important visit indeed. French President Macron, Polish Prime Minister Tusk, German Chancellor Merz, and British Prime Minister Starmer have arrived in Ukraine. Honestly, their appearance was quite unexpected. And today there will be a meeting within the framework of the Coalition of the Willing. This is actually the first time during the full-scale war that the leaders of 4 countries are simultaneously present in the Ukrainian capital, here with us. They have already released a joint statement in which they claim that their visit carries a message to the Kremlin coordinated with the United States. What kind of message? To agree to a complete ceasefire lasting 30 days, without any preconditions. In other words, Donald Trump has given them a mandate. He recently, by the way, said, I'm in favor, and let Europe join, China, Erdogan, Turkey, let them join too. So that's just to give you an idea of what's happening today. The proposal for a 30-day ceasefire, ideally the ceasefire that Putin announced should smoothly transition into the 30-day one. Right now, all the leaders have already spoken with Trump by phone. I think they've worked something out for Putin. Peskov has already given him a kick out of the doghouse, so to speak. He came out and is already saying, we agree, there are just a few little nuances. I think if he says little nuances one more time, he'll get smacked on the forehead by the United States. If Russia ultimately refuses to agree to the ceasefire, they have prepared an extremely unpleasant scenario for Russia. This is what a friend of mine who is involved in this process told me. And in other words, there must be a tough scenario for Russia if they do not agree to the 30-day ceasefire. By the way, Trump said, I'll tell you the deadline in about 2 weeks, and that deadline actually fell on May 10th, today. Therefore, as I understand it, the British sanctions against 100 tankers of the Shadow Fleet, which are the core of this very Shadow Fleet, will seem like child's play to Russia. And finally, in this episode, Donald Trump stated that he can't sleep because of the war in Ukraine. He feels so sorry, so sad about it. Well, of course, we believe him. But friends, today's visit is extremely important. If Putin now tries to wriggle out of the 30-day ceasefire, I think the screws will start to be tightened much more. And so his dissatisfied face with those tinted brown eyebrows will be looking quite sad in the near future. And as for you, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and support the fundraiser if you can. Be sure to subscribe to this channel. Wishing us all a peaceful day, and of course, glory to Ukraine.